Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Blair parent Marc Murphy, an acclaimed chef, restaurateur, television personality, and longtime judge on Chopped.
You had to be somewhere where, yes, it was a job, it was routine, it was over and over, right? Where it's a craft, right? You make the lamb chops the same way over and over all night if you work on that station. You have to really hone your skills. You have to be really good at it. And I always said to people, peripheral vision, like take the guy's job next to you. Like learn his job as well, because when you need to step in, you can do that job too. And be very versatile. There's a lot of things. You have to be versatile. You have to be accomplished. You have to be diligent. You have to be hungry. You have to be all those things. And yeah, you have to get hurt sometimes. A lot of people just give up and don't show up because it's too hard. If you want it and you want it bad enough, it's going to be hard.
Marc, a huge welcome to the Buc Stops Here. And I'm excited to learn more about your remarkable career in the culinary world, from leading acclaimed restaurants in New York City to becoming one of the most recognizable and respected voices on Food Network. Psyched to have you here, Marc.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
As you know, Blair connections run deep, and it's been a true pleasure getting to know you during your son Callan's time on the Hilltop. We couldn't be prouder of all that he's accomplished, and we're very much looking forward to celebrating at all of the commencement festivities tomorrow. Tomorrow, Callan graduates. Fingers crossed the rain will hold off. We're looking at the weather, but fired up to celebrate with you. I have to admit, though, it's a little intimidating to interview someone who's not only hosted his own iHeartRadio podcast, but also has made so many TV appearances, from Food Network to Home and Garden Network, Good Morning America, Today Show, and so on. So as we go through this podcast, I hope you'll interrupt and give me tips about what I'm doing wrong. So
there's no wrong or right.
I love it. I love it. So before we get into your life and career, I should first point out that my experience with the restaurant business was about 10 years of working at the Chatham Squire in Cape Cod throughout my high school and college years. And of course, I was just a teenager earning money for school, but I did get a good sense of the restaurant world. And when we first hung out, I loved hearing stories about your start. So to kick us off, what was your early start in the culinary industry, and how did that grow into the passion you bring to your work today?
I'll give you the brief version because I don't want your podcast to be too long. But my introduction into the food world was really by necessity. I'm very dyslexic. I went to many, many different schools. Nobody really knew what dyslexia was. I was just told I was stupid and I wasn't concentrating and I wasn't thinking enough. So when I finally made it out of high school, I moved to New York City and I was crashing on my brother's couch for quite a while. And he was living with his girlfriend at the time. And I was just doing odd jobs, handyman work around New York for his girlfriend because she was born and raised here and she knew a lot of people who needed closets built or baby rooms painted and stuff. And then I felt bad that I was living there for free on the couch. So I would cook dinner every night. And after a couple of months, I guess my brother kind of said, you seem to like this cooking thing. Why don't you think about cooking school? Because he had actually seen one or had been to one briefly. He was doing stuff in between college and had washed dishes at this place to make some money. And he goes, I know this cooking school. Anyway, I ended up finding some money and I went to the cooking school. And lo and behold, I was very good at all the practical work. Now, the written tests still wasn't doing a very good job on, but all the actual work was the physical work was great. I was good at it. I realized. And then, like a year happened, I was traveling and whatnot. And I came back to New York and I went back to my cooking school teacher and I said, I have $11 left. I need a job. And she says, are you really serious? Where have you been? And I was goofing off with friends and bouncing around the world. And I said, yes, I better get a job. So I finally went to this job, a place called Prefix, under the chef name was Terrence Brennan, and his two sous chefs. One was David Pasternak, and the other one was Joey Fortunato. And that was my entry point into the restaurant industry. They gave me a job. I worked garde manger, which was the cold station. And I still remember Ricardo, who was the guy who was working there before me. He was teaching me the station, and he was this wonderful kid. He was from Mexico, and he taught me that station, and I worked that station. I worked in this restaurant for probably 2 years. I learned every station, from the saute to the grill to the hot apps to desserts. And after about 2 years, the head sous chef, David Pasternak, came up to me and said, "That's it. You're done here." I go, "What do you mean? What am I fired?" He goes, "No, you've learned everything you need to learn here. You need to go learn somewhere else to further your career." So he basically told me to leave, and I left. And I actually packed my bags. I had been saving.
So you got fired. Is that what I'm hearing?
He says, it's time for you to go find somewhere else. And I remember I was making $241 a week.
I love it.
And I would take a $50 bill every week from my paycheck and put it inside of a book, because I was living on somebody else's couch, and on the shelf I used to save a $50 bill every week. So I had a little bit of money saved up, and I had an old friend that lived in Paris. So I bought a plane ticket and moved to Paris and went and crashed on his couch and bought the Michelin Guide and walked around to all the restaurants and finally found a job there and worked there for almost 2.5 years. That's
all right. We're going to get in. I love it. We're going to get into all of this. I mean, this is, I love that, $11, 241. But before the culinary world, I know that race car driving was actually your first passion. Is that right?
Yeah, I had an old friend of mine in high school that I was with in New Hampshire, and he was into racing, and I liked cars as well. I thought it would be fun. I always loved driving, and I have pretty quick reflexes, I guess. I don't know. I thought I was good at it at that time, and I thought I would be able to do that. And at one of the schools, actually, I took car shop and learned how to rebuild engines and bought a used car and rebuilt the whole thing, honing out the cylinders and, getting the whole thing back up in order. And so I rebuilt a couple cars, and I thought it was fun. And then so I finally ended up signing up to go to this thing called Skip Barber's Racing School. And I think I remember paying for like the down payment, but then I couldn't come up with the rest of the money. It turns out race car driving is very expensive. Tires are expensive. You can't really do it unless you have probably a fair amount of money to start. And you then need to very quickly get sponsorships and people to help pay for your career, because it's very, very expensive. And so I realized, and also I remember I had this friend of mine, and he said to me, he goes, "Now, if you don't have the money to really go after this, you're going to end up becoming a person that sits in the pits of racetracks and changing tires and changing oil." And he goes, "Is that where you want to hang out?" Traveling the country and working in grease pits, basically. And I was like, yeah, now that you mention it, that doesn't sound very exciting.
Well, now you drive a sweet scooter, which we'll get to later on in this episode. So, Marc, you're best known for your take on French and Italian cuisine, and having grown up with a father who I believe was a French diplomat, which had you living in Milan, Paris, Villefranche, Washington, D.C., Rome, and Genoa, and all of that was before you turned 12. How did your early life experiences lead you to where you are today?
So I think, first off, my father was American. He was an American diplomat, not a French diplomat.
Excuse me. Thank you.
That's okay. That's all right.
Good correction.
So, my background is my mother's French, my father's American, and I was born in Milan. And my grandparents, when my grandfather worked for a French oil company, he was an engineer in the oil fields. And so he retired in the south of France in a place called Le Rouret, which is above Grasse in the south of France. So we lived everywhere for anywhere between 2 to 3 years. So we would move all the time. I started in Milan, went to Paris. We moved from Paris, we went to Villefranche in the south of France, then Virginia, and then Rome for a little bit, then Genoa. And then I went to boarding school in Rome, and then I ended up going to boarding school in New Hampshire until they asked me not to go to school there anymore. And then I went to school in Maine. Then I moved to New York City. But but most of the summers we would spend in the south of France at my grandparents' house, because that's where we would go for summer. It was easy to get there, usually wherever we were living, and we'd spend a couple weeks there. And I think that by living in all of these places, it was interesting, because when I went to cooking school and I was a young cook, I realized that I had a big advantage because my palate had already been developed in a certain sense, where I knew what a good vinaigrette tasted like, because I had grown up in places that made them, we had good olive oil, we had good things. And I knew what a rare steak was. When I remember one of my sous chefs said to me, "You're so lucky. I never had a medium rare steak until I was 22. I lived in Queens, and my mother used to cook the hell out of every steak, and it was always dead." I never knew a steak could taste this good, right? So I feel like I had a pretty big advantage on my on palate wise because I did grow up that way. Like my grandfather used to love that I loved food. Like that was his thing. Like when I showed up, he's like mon petit fils, which is like my little grandson. When I used to show up, there was a restaurant that we always went to because they had a foie gras terrine that had the jelly on the outside, which was one of my favorite dishes. I also had, we would go get up in the morning and go get the bread, to the bread baker and get the bread every morning. And then once or twice a week, we would go down to the markets and he would go see his cheese ladies. And which would mean you would walk into a store that was basically, shelves and laden with cheese and these women in like lab coats serving you. And of course, I was the little grandson who he was very proud to be there with. And they would let me taste all these different cheeses. And I mean, to a point where I remember walking out sometimes with handfuls of cheese going, I can't eat all this. I got to throw some out. It was so much, but it was great. Yeah. So I had a very good, my childhood really helped me develop my palate. And so that's why I guess my cooking now is, basically French, Italian, and with obviously some American influence.
Well, along those lines, so you formally trained, I think, France, Italy, you worked your way through some of New York's finest kitchens. And you mentioned some of this, but you have relationships with legendary chefs like Alain Ducasse and David Pasternak. And so what did these formative years teach you? Share a little bit of what you learned.
I mean, to me, David Pasternak was probably one of my biggest mentors. He taught me, especially when I was young and a smart ass and always answered back and so on and so forth. He would take you into the walk-in refrigerator, which was the office where you would get yelled at. And he was always like, you know what, you're going to make it in this business, but you got to shut up and you got to listen more. And sometimes people are going to tell you to do things that you don't agree with. You're here to do a job for somebody. Take what you want, leave what you don't want, right? So he says a lot of the times you're going to learn working in a restaurant what not to do is just as important of what to do. So you have to be a sponge in a restaurant, and especially if you want to be a restaurateur, because cooking is one part of it, right? The air conditioning, the lighting, the music, the plumbing. There's the characters that you hire. It's a big sphere of all sorts of things happening in a restaurant. So you kind of need to be a sponge. As you grow up in a kitchen or learning as a cook, you learn that, but you also, when the AC guy is fixing the AC, you kind of stick your head over there and go, hey, how did you do that? Kind of thing. You want to learn everything. You become a sponge. You want to absorb everything from cooking techniques to how you hire, how you manage, how you fix things. I mean, it's just, So you grow up in the industry. You just have to sort of, be aware of everything. I think that's the way you become somebody that's, and it's probably true for most jobs. You have to have peripheral vision.
No, I think that's a peripheral vision. I like that. That's, that and being a sponge. I'm going to use some of that in my graduation speech tomorrow, maybe. I believe it was when you were executive chef of La Fourchette when the New York Times critic Ruth Reichel awarded you a glowing review that said something along the lines of you being able to take a simple green salad and make it look like, quote, a ruffled hat in a painting by Renoir. So that's a pretty amazing compliment. What did that mean to you at the time, and how has that meant in the years since?
Wow, I haven't heard about that review in a long time. But Ruth Reichel was probably one of my biggest heroes in the restaurant industry. She was an amazing reviewer. She always reviewed me and liked my food, and was extremely fair, I think, in her reviews and whatnot. And then she became the head of Gourmet magazine for 10 years as well. And I just had recently, in the past like 7 or 8 years, I got to meet her and go on a trip and meet her and really became friends with her. And now we actually talk. And it's one of those, like, it's crazy to see that, to have gone through that, so to speak. But, back then, when I was being reviewed at La Fourchette, it was the be all and end all. Like there was no Yelp, there was no, TikTok or Instagram. It was the New York Times was the review that made or broke you, basically. And I can still remember if you got a bad review in the New York Times and you were shooting for 3 stars or whatever, shooting for the stars, and you got a bad review, you might as well go home and close up shop. I mean, it was that consequential.
Yeah.
So it was very, very cutthroat. So I think, when I got that review, it was just, I got a good review. And the funny thing about reviews back in those days, she mentioned that salad. And I think in the same review, she mentioned our chicken dish. And we were all very excited because they're very good food cost items. So because we knew that for the next month, everybody was coming in to eat that salad and that chicken.
And chicken.
That's all we saw.
Perfect.
Like, we make other things, It was very funny. It was very funny to go through that. But it was a huge compliment. It was a feather in my cap. It was something that really it really stood out, and it I think helped cement my career, or cemented my place here in New York City as a chef here.
Well, and then in 2004, you opened your first independent enterprise. So what motivated you to make that jump? And what do you enjoy most about all the success that's followed at all of the restaurants you've built? Maybe you can share a little bit about that journey.
That journey happened. It was after 9/11. And I had many jobs before. And basically I was running 2 restaurants for another guy at that time, right when it happened. And everything fell apart. There was, the restaurants were closing, people were fleeing. There was no more jobs. I was actually going to take off and get on my motorcycle. I had a friend of mine in San Diego. I was like packing my stuff
no
up.
race cars. No race cars.
No. I had a big Ducati ST2, and I knew I could cross the country on it. I was going to pack it up, all my stuff and anything I had left, and I was going to go and maybe start over in San Diego. My buddy, he needed help because he had just bought a house and he needed to do all the sheetrocking and build it out, and I was going to go help him because I could do that. And then all of a sudden, I met this woman right before. A friend of mine, a guy who I had worked with, begged me to stay and not leave because he wanted me to reopen a restaurant that was downtown, and it was part of the recovery effort after 9/11. And he basically handed me an envelope with a bunch of money in it and said, "You're the only one that can do this for me. You know the restaurant, you ran it before, and I need you to do this. And I'm going to get a very good lease if I get this place open within a week." So I said, "Okay, I'll give you 3 months. I'm staying for 3 months and then I'm out." And during that time, I ended up meeting my now wife while I was doing that 3-month gig. And we ended up starting to hang out. And I said, well, I decided not to go to San Diego, but we decided to take a trip to Europe for, because there was no work for me here, and she was in between jobs. So we ended up going to Europe for 3 months. And as she puts it, it was a tour de Marc. We started in the north and went all the way down south. And it was either we went to visit relatives of mine or friends of mine, like from London to Amsterdam. I went to see my great aunt in Luxembourg, who was in an old age home. We went and saw my parents who lived in the south of France. And then, so we bounced around. And after, when I came back, I started looking for work, getting back on the, back in the train. And I decided that I almost took this job at this very, very large, it was restaurant and also a big banquet hall. And I said to myself, well, if I do that, I'm going to be working 7 days a week again and getting right back in the grind. And my wife and I decided, well, let's buy this little building in Tribeca. If you're going to work that hard, why don't you work for yourself? So her and I, we bought this little building in Tribeca and we opened up our first restaurant together, Landmark. And it was the beginning of that, basically. And we worked together for many years. We opened this one, and then we opened Ditch Plains in the West Village, which is a New York style fish shack. And then I had Landmark at the Time Warner Center, which was the largest restaurant. Then I had another Ditch Plains, and we opened Kingside on 57th Street. And then I had a management gig down in Florida at the Hard Rock Casino. So I had at one point, I'd gone from, it's sort of your head spins. You start a business, you start this, and it just keeps, because of the restaurant business, you cultivate and you work with your friends. It's a big family. And, the only way to keep that family together was to keep growing. Like my manager here, at the small restaurant was going to leave me if I couldn't pay him more, and I couldn't pay him more. But if I opened another restaurant and he became manager of both of them, then I could end up paying him more, and so on and so on. So we kept growing. I ended up growing to about 650 employees.
And I want to know.
You pinch yourself after that.
I bet.
What happened?
Well, I want to know how many tour de marques you took between that time, or was that one and only?
I don't know. It was always, you just kind of, it just kind of goes by. Time flies, and I always love what I've done. And it was one of those things I just enjoyed it. It never felt like I was working.
Well, so at your peak, well, I don't know if it's peak, but you had 650 employees, and yet somehow during all of this, you got to become a pretty big television personality with Chopped. Can you talk a little bit about how that entered your life?
Yeah, I had an assistant at the time who actually still works with me, Jessie, and she handed me a disc, because back in the old days they had the discs and you shove it into your computer. And it was a pilot that they had shot at the Food Network, and they had contacted me and said, "Hey, we want you to come and be a judge on this show." And I had done, like Today's Show. I had done like morning TV shows. I had done a couple pilot things for them. They had asked me to do things because I had a big restaurant you could shoot in uptown. And my assistant was like, "Well, you better go on that show." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And she goes, "Yeah, because if people see you on the show, people are going to come to the restaurant. So you got to go do this." So I went and did it. And it was an interesting show. I mean, it's still going. It's been over 16 years now, 17 years, I think. It was funny because it was still pretty much wasn't the beginning of the Food Network, but it was still, Food Network was less than 10 years old at the time. And so it was a show that they made and they kind of just put it out there. And people were like, eh. And then they did it again, and then they did it again. And it was weird because I don't think it really caught on till like season 5 or 6 when I think it really started building. At least, I mean, I don't work at the Food Network. I don't know what their, what do you call them? Their ratings and all that stuff
Viewership,
are. But,
sure.
But it seemed to me that it just sort of crescendoed. It kept getting bigger and bigger. And it's still, and now, of course, they play so many reruns. It's on all the time.
Any memorable or fun moments from Chopped about either a contestant or another judge, or something you ate that you either loved or really didn't like?
My gosh, there's so many. I mean, we've done almost 1,000 episodes. I've been on about a third of those. So it's there's been many, many, many characters. There's been many funny stories about people coming through, and some people. The funniest part of the whole show, I think, is that people watch it for years, sitting on their couch, and good cooks come in and they're like, "I've seen this show forever. I got this." And then after the 20-minute appetizer round, they kind of stand in front of you and hold their head and go, "Wow, it's a lot harder than I thought." It's a lot easier from the couch.
Everything's
isn't it,
easier on the couch, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Marc, you've also been active in public service and food advocacy as a food council and board member of City Harvest and a member of the Leadership Council for Share Our Strength, No Kids Hungry campaign. What does that work mean to you?
I mean, I think, Chopped has a lot to do with that, because having the notoriety of being on a television show is a privilege, and that privilege doesn't come without, it comes with responsibilities. And I think responsibilities, everybody should give back. I think, being a good citizen of the world and being a good, contributing to society is, I think, something that I've always been very much cognizant of, and helping other people. And having been on the Food Network and having notoriety like that, being able to join boards such as City Harvest or Share Our Strength, Don't Get Hungry, it brings awareness. It brings the ability to be auctioned off and cook dinners for people for a lot of money, to raise money for these organizations that help children and help hungry people. People often wonder why a chef or why the Food Network even got involved with a hunger organization. It's like, to me, it's a no-brainer. It's like we feed people in our restaurants and our customers all the time. We should worry about feeding the people that are in need of food as well. So I think that's one of those things that I think is just sort of a no-brainer, to be able to help other people out. I think, and it's very rewarding. It's a rewarding thing. It's rewarding to watch our colleagues do it as well. And it seems as though the restaurant industry, whenever there's a problem, everybody comes to the restaurant industry to raise money for that problem. And it's there's a lot of love in this industry, which is why I like being in it.
Yeah, no. For sure. And just some of the stories you've told me about being with other chefs doing this really good work, it's very inspiring. So cookbook authoring is also among your list of accomplishments. So if you had to pick one dish that want those listening to make from your 2015 book, Seasoned with Authority, what would it be?
There's a dish that I get the most feedback on, and it's the dish that I've probably been making the longest in my life. I can still remember in New Hampshire going to the general store and buying the quasi not right ingredients, but almost right ingredients to make carbonara, and in my dorm. And it's just one of those dishes that it's one of my, I think it's like the perfect dish. I have a very simple recipe in my cookbook on how to make it. And I have to say that I love it when people come up to me and say, your cookbook's great, and the carbonara recipe is always in rotation at our house. It's great. Like, and it's great to know that I can, and I do it a lot for demos because I'm like, all right, guys, I'm going to teach you how to make carbonara properly because there's so many myths out there.
No, thank you. And this dovetails a little bit to, food is love. You're talking about just the industry. It can also be really challenging and long hours, late nights, grinding. And how did you create just a great kitchen culture? How did you create a great restaurant culture? What's the secret sauce?
Well, to me, it was a lot about when I worked as a young cook. I learned what not to do in a lot of kitchens. I worked for some very temperamental people that would be screaming and yelling and throwing things. And I sort of sat back and said, this doesn't seem to accomplish anything but high blood pressure for that person. And I thought, if I ever run my own kitchen or my own restaurant, I'm going to hire adults or people that are normal, respectable, and we're going to speak and we're going to communicate and we're going to communicate normally and not have fits being thrown or anything like that. And I think it's especially in today's world, I think people have really, that we've gone through that whole shift in our industry going away from that. And I think it works. I think, you get much better retention. You get people that want to work with you. It's more pleasant to work for people that are, understanding. And I've always been, we can talk it out later. We can, you can get a little frustrated, but you have to be able to be, it's got to make sense. It can't just be useless anger that's not going to help anything. I've often been in situations where there's chefs yelling at somebody and I look at them, I go, that person doesn't speak your language and they don't understand what you're saying. You can keep saying it louder, but it's not, he doesn't have a hearing problem. He doesn't understand your language.
Have you seen any episodes of the FX show, The Bear?
No, I have not, because everybody asks me, and I feel as though I've sort of lived that world. I don't need to see the stress of it on television as well when I go home.
Well, and the reason why I asked is because having worked in restaurants and listening to you describe it, I think there isn't always the accurate depictions of sort of what goes on in restaurants. And I love hearing you talk about the joy and the love that happens, in addition to, I'm sure, lots of stressful moments and late nights. So
yeah, it's a dysfunctional family, but everybody does get along. People wouldn't be doing this and working these hard hours and working like this if they didn't like it. Of course, everybody complains about work sometimes, but in the end, it's sort of I'd much rather be doing this than sitting behind a desk with a suit and tie on, and that would be more stressful to me.
Can you share a little bit about what you're doing now? No longer 650 employees, and pretty interesting hearing about the diversity of where you are in the world and what you're doing.
Yeah, I've even when I had all the restaurants, every day looked different. Every day is a different day. I don't have a routine that keeps up the only routine I have is I try to work out every morning. That's it. Besides that, you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes I'm doing a podcast. Sometimes I'm tonight I have a dinner for 12 people and I'm doing a demo for them. I'm in the process of writing another cookbook. I still do, when people ask me to do TV stuff, I still pop on and do that whenever I'm asked. I travel. I do all sorts of food festivals around the country. I'll go cook for people, for people that hire me to go do things somewhere else sometimes. So the main thing that I do, I still have the building in Tribeca, and I do private events about 90% of the time in my space. I have 4 employees now, and we bring people in when we need to do events. And I also do a pop-up restaurant 3 days a month. where 3 days a month we do a prefix menu, $95, and we do beverage on consumption, and we turn it into a restaurant, reservations on Resi, and we just turn it into a restaurant for 3 days a month. I do it because this way I can make fun of all my chef friends. I say I only work 3 days a month. And also, it reminds me every three days a month never to open a restaurant again.
But in between all that, you're doing charity bike rides throughout France. You're going to the NBA and doing all sorts of showcase events. You're traveling to different festivals. I mean, I think you work a few more than 3 days a month.
No, it's very funny. I have a friend of mine, I think 2 years ago, it was January like 2nd or 3rd, and I was sitting down here and I called him and I said, I got to find a job. I don't have enough to do. And then I think 3 months later, he calls me and he goes, "Hey, how's that going? And you haven't had a day off, have you, in 3 months? Have you been doing something every day?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Remember that conversation you had with me?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, you're right. I do. I am kind of busy, I guess."
But you love what you do.
Exactly.
Pivoting a little bit to Blair and Callan. So how does it feel to be the proud dad of a soon-to-be graduate 24 hours from now?
Well, I'll be getting the box of tissues out and, the whole 9 yards. I think, for me, Blair has been absolutely an amazing experience for our family, at least. My son came to my wife and I when he was in 10th grade in New York, and he says, "I want to play basketball in college. I have to leave New York City, and I'm going to go to boarding school." And I had such a terrible experience in boarding school because I was dyslexic, and I just did terribly in school, and I got kicked out of every school. And I never thought my kids would ever. I would never thought one of my kids would ever go away to boarding school. I did not think it was I had such a bad memory of it. And he was adamant about wanting to play basketball in college and wanted to find the best school to get him ready for that. And Blair came up and he went and interviewed, and the coach basically is, from what I understand how it works, the coach seemed to give him the blessing, and he joined Blair, and he's had his time there, 3 years. He went back. He decided to repeat a year so he could be on that team and do what he wanted to do to get to college. So he's done 5 years of high school to be able to go to play basketball in college. And I'm extremely proud of him. He accomplished that goal. He got recruited, and he's going to be a point guard at Ithaca College. And I think it's just, I sort of I'm jealous and proud and everything at once, because I don't know many 16 or 15-year-olds that set out to have a goal at that young age and be able to do it. He really, there's most kids at 15. I mean, at least me, I was, I don't know. I was probably doing something stupid and definitely not thinking about my career. I didn't know what I wanted to do till I was in, after I finally got out of my last high school and needed money and needed to eat. That's how I started. I was hungry. And he had a goal at a young age and put his mind to it and his body to it, because it's a physical and mental game. And he's done it.
Well, we're really proud of him. We're proud of all he accomplished on the court, off the court. I was excited that he was on the mound pitching some this season, which is great. And, as I say, once you join the Blair family, you're always a member for life. So I hope that not just Callan, but you and Pamela and will stay closely connected to us.
Absolutely.
So bringing this a little bit to a closing now. We've discussed it, and you've trained and worked alongside so many young chefs over the years. So for the young alums who might listen to this podcast, considering this is their career, what do you think separates people who ultimately thrive in a high-pressure creative environments from those who don't?
I think there's a little bit of, you have to be able to put up with some pain. It doesn't always feel good. I think that's something that, and you got to show up. You can't flake out. You can't quit because it's hard. You can't quit because somebody doesn't like you. You can't give up. And in the same moment, you also have to be able to, I think for me, it was always like, you always had to keep learning. You had to be somewhere where, yes, it was a job. It was routine. It was over and over, right? That's what we do in our industry. It's a craft, right? You make the lamb chops the same way over and over all night. If you work on that station, you do that. You have to really hone your skills. You have to be really good at it. And I always said to people, peripheral vision, like take the guy's job next to you. Like learn his job as well, because when you need to step in, you can do that job too, is being able to be and be very versatile. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things. You have to be versatile. You have to be accomplished. You have to be diligent. You have to be hungry. You have to be, all those things. And yeah, you have to get hurt sometimes. And that's as much of a lesson as accolades. I think a lot of people just, give up and don't show up because it's too hard. If you want it and you want it bad enough, it's going to be hard and you're going to have to suffer a little bit, which is fine. I think a lot of people feel like you should just go through life, smelling and picking daisies all the time, but it's not. You have to, you got to cut yourself. You got to burn yourself to get to work your way up.
Yep. No, that's great. That's great. Resiliency is so important. As we wrap up, any suggestions on one budget-friendly, not-to-be-missed meal in New York City? Do you have any? I know.
Oh my gosh.
Budget-friendly. Do you have any that you, other than getting a hot dog on the street?
There's so many good restaurants. I mean, I would say Chinatown's a great place to go. There's great diversity there. There's great food. It's not very expensive. There's all these different regions of China that you can sort of explore. There's great falafel places in the city. Also, if you're really interested in people's types of cuisine, you can always go sit at somebody's bar and, have a couple appetizers. It might be a little more expensive some places, but there's New York is just it's a huge place with immense amount of talent and so much different cuisine here that it's the best city in the world. Let's put it that way. If you want to be in the food business. If
you could cook one meal for anyone, past or present, what would it be and what would you make?
I mean, I've always said I would have loved to have met Winston Churchill. I think he seemed like an interesting guy. He has an amazing history, and I would probably make him a nice bowl of carbonara, and I would want to get to the end because I'd love to sit there and have a cigar and sip a cognac with him. He always looked so rested and pensive, and I'm sure his mind was so he saw so much and did so much. It would be great to just sit there and listen to him.
That's great. Marc, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. This was great. I'm sure other members of the Blair family will get a lot out of it. And huge cheers to the graduation celebration ahead. We're excited to see you on campus tonight and tomorrow, and certainly to follow Callan's career. And look forward to all sorts of fun eating excursions we'll have together in the future. But thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early.
All right, buddy. All right.
Take
Cheers,
care.
Marc.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.